The sky over Langley Hollow was the color of iron, low, cold, and unwilling to weep. Margaret Langley's funeral was sparsely attended. A modest scattering of neighbors, old acquaintances, and church members filled only the first two pews of the aged chapel. The rest of the room was hollow, the silence so thick it made the slightest cough echo with guilt. At the front stood a closed mahogany casket flanked by wilting white lilies. Her favorite, someone must have remembered. Camille, Victor, and Eloise Langley arrived separately, each stepping from Blacktown cars, not so much grieving as performing. Their shoes were too shiny, their coats too well cut, their expressions expertly neutral, each one hiding a different kind of discomfort. Camille, the eldest, adjusted her designer sunglasses as she stepped into the chapel, surveying the scene with the sharp eyes of a seasoned attorney who'd rather be anywhere else. She took her seat with the kind of posture that repelled intimacy, back straight, arms crossed, lips pursed as if she was bracing for a deposition. Victor arrived next, late as usual. A Bluetooth earpiece still nestled in his ear, though he silenced his phone just before stepping in. He barely glanced at the casket, too busy typing out one final email to his assistant. Tech mogul, startup king, Forbes cover boy. He treated the funeral like another conference he needed to check off. Only when he sat beside Camille did he offer a quick, "Hey," without making eye contact. Eloise entered last. She wore no black, only a threadbare burgundy shawl over a paint-stained skirt. Her eyes were rimmed red, but it was unclear whether from tears or lack of sleep. The moment she stepped in, her gaze locked on the casket. She lingered, her hand brushing the edge of it gently, before sitting in the far corner, away from her siblings. The eulogy was delivered by a mild-voiced priest who admitted he hadn't known Margaret well, but believed she was a woman of quiet strength. The siblings listened with polite detachment. There were no shared looks, no held hands, no tissue passed. Whatever had once bonded them as a family had long been undone by time, pride, and silence. Afterward, at the house, things grew colder. Langley House had not changed much in the years they'd been away. The Grand Victorian still sat perched on the edge of the cliffs, overlooking the sea like an aging queen watching a kingdom she no longer ruled. The shutters creaked, vines strangled the outer walls. Inside, dust blanketed every surface like a shroud. The fireplace in the parlor still bore the scorch mark from a long-forgotten accident. Margaret had lived here alone for nearly a decade, refusing all offers to move in with any of them, refusing even the suggestion of an assisted living facility. "This house is the last honest thing I have," she'd once said, and no one had argued. Not because they understood, but because none of them had time to care. Now they waited impatiently in the parlor for the reading of the will. The family's longtime lawyer, Edwin Talcott, entered precisely at 2 o'clock. In his 70s himself, Talcott was sharp, no nonsense, and dressed in the same charcoal suit he wore to every funeral. He carried a leather briefcase, worn but cared for, and opened it slowly, deliberately, as if savoring the moment. "As you are aware," he began, glancing over his glasses, "your mother updated her will 3 months ago. The terms of distribution are unconventional." That made them sit up. He removed 3 sealed envelopes from a manila folder, each labeled in Margaret's precise cursive: Camille, Victor, Eloise. "She left a message for each of you," Talcott said. "Before any assets can be disbursed, you are to read these privately. What follows is a condition of inheritance." Camille narrowed her eyes. "A condition?" Talcott nodded. "Your mother has left you a series of challenges. Instructions are included in your letters. Only upon completion of all tasks and unanimous agreement among you will the estate be divided." Victor snorted. "This is a joke, right?" "She was of sound mind," Talcott said, "and the will is legally binding." Eloise turned her envelope over in her hands, tracing her name. "Why would she do this?" Talcott paused. She said, "They abandoned me long before I left them. Let's see if they're willing to come home to the truth." A thick silence fell. Outside, the wind howled through the gables. Inside, the house seemed to inhale, alive in a way it hadn't been in years. Camille broke the silence first, tearing open her envelope with surgical precision. Victor followed, still skeptical, muttering under his breath. Eloise hesitated, but opened hers last, her hands trembling, and just like that, the game began. None of them knew that their mother's death wasn't the end, it was the first move. Langley House had always been too quiet. Now, with Margaret Langley gone, or so they believed, the silence was heavier, pressing in on the walls like a held breath. Each sibling retreated to their respective childhood room after the will reading, the envelope still fresh in their hands, the paper inside trembling with more than just their mother's final wishes. These were not instructions, they were provocations. Margaret hadn't merely asked them to do tasks. She'd demanded they confront what they'd all spent their adult lives trying to forget. Camille's letter had directed her to start where the mask was born. She knew immediately, the dressing room at the end of the East Wing, where Margaret once applied makeup for her local theater performances, long before motherhood consumed her stage time. Victor's letter sent him to the machine that never worked, a cryptic reference he soon deduced as the old radio in the sunroom, one their father had tried fixing every Sunday and never succeeded. Eloise was told to find what the sea never washed away, and though she didn't understand it yet, her feet led her instinctively toward the old beachside storage cellar, now sealed with rust and memory. But first, they all wandered the house, aimless under the weight of nostalgia and unease. The mansion was a labyrinth of creaking floorboards and faded wallpaper, a mausoleum of half-kept memories. The wallpaper curled at the edges, revealing older, darker patterns beneath, remnants of past lives Margaret had tried to scrub away. The chandelier in the foyer swung ever so slightly, though no wind moved through the still air. Camille, always in control, hesitated at the threshold of the East Wing. She hadn't stepped foot in that part of the house in years. As a child, she'd spent hours in the dressing room, watching her mother transform with powder, rouge, and false eyelashes. But somewhere between adolescence and bitterness, she'd labeled it all performative nonsense. Now, walking into the dusty room, she found the mirror still intact, but covered with a white sheet. Pulling it off released a cloud of dust and a flurry of memories. Taped to the glass was a Polaroid, a young Camille dressed in one of Margaret's gowns, smiling, a rare, unguarded smile. On the back, the mask you wore was mine. But whose was I wearing? Camille's throat tightened, and for the first time in years, she wondered what her mother might have sacrificed for them, what dreams she buried beneath motherhood and ungrateful silence. Across the house, Victor stared at the antique radio, frustrated. It had never worked, and it certainly didn't now. But a slip of paper was jammed inside the back panel. After prying it open, he pulled out an old cassette tape, labeled simply, "Play Me Alone." Finding an old player, he slid it in. The hiss of static gave way to Margaret's voice, soft, older than he remembered. "You always thought I resented your father for failing us. But the truth is, I resented him for letting you worship him while he lied to us both. Find the place he hid his favorite book, Victor. It's where the truth starts." Victor's brow furrowed. His father had kept a secret book stash? Where? And what truth? Meanwhile, Eloise stood at the edge of the cliffside cellar, eyes stinging from the salt air. The cellar had been boarded up after a storm nearly washed it away when she was 10. She remembered the night vaguely. A fierce argument between her parents, the howling wind, and the scream that never came from a person. Now, as she pried open the rusted padlock, her letter in her coat pocket, she felt a strange pull, as if something wanted to be found. Inside, beneath years of rotted boxes and collapsed shelves, she found an oilcloth-wrapped bundle. Inside, a faded crayon drawing. Her signature, at age 7. A woman, a man, and a child. But the woman wasn't Margaret. And the man wasn't their father. The child had red hair. None of the Langleys had red hair. Eloise sat hard on the damp floor, clutching the drawing. Her hands trembled. She didn't remember ever making it. But it was hers. Her handwriting. Her style. And something else caught her eye. Scrawled faintly in pencil behind the drawing. He said not to tell. Back at the house, all 3 siblings gathered in the dining room. Unplanned, but instinctive. None shared what they'd found, but the silence between them wasn't just awkward. It was dangerous. The house, their mother's final stage, was not just remembering. It was revealing. And Margaret, even in death, was still directing the show. By the third day in Langley House, the walls felt closer, the hallways were colder, the wind harsher, and despite the size of the mansion, the three siblings seemed to be tripping over each other at every turn, always arriving at the same rooms uninvited, as if drawn by some invisible magnet of shared guilt. Victor hadn't slept, not since the tape. He kept hearing Margaret's voice in his head, soft and accusing, rattling around like loose screws in a machine he couldn't repair. Camille had buried herself in tasks, sorting through decades of financial records and old letters in search of, what? Logic? Control? Answers she didn't want to admit she needed? Eloise, on the other hand, had begun to talk to the house. Whispers, really. Gentle musings to herself, to her mother, to something unnamed. She wandered barefoot, sketchbook tucked under her arm, stopping occasionally to trace the edge of a banister or brush her fingers along a forgotten photo frame. Her eyes had the distant gleam of someone beginning to remember things she wished she hadn't. It was Eloise who first heard the sound in the attic. A soft scraping, then a low thump, then silence. At first, she thought it was a raccoon or a loose shutter, but when it happened again, just past midnight, she stood beneath the attic hatch in the hallway, clutching a flashlight and her mother's letter in her pocket, the silence pressing against her like a warning. She didn't wake Camille or Victor. Not yet. The attic ladder creaked as she climbed it, one cautious foot after another, until the hatch swung upward with a puff of dust. She stepped into darkness. The beam of her flashlight danced across old furniture draped in yellowing sheets, casting shadows like hunched ghosts. The air smelled of cedar, mildew, and something faintly sweet, like old perfume clinging to forgotten cloth. That's when she saw it, a seam in the wall. To the right of the chimney, behind an armoire, the wall wasn't quite flush. There was a sliver of space, barely noticeable, where a false panel had been set in decades ago. The wallpaper there didn't match, aged at a different rate, a different texture. Heart pounding, Eloise pressed her palm to it. It moved. The panel groaned open slowly, revealing a hidden room no more than 10 feet square. Inside, dust danced in the beam of her flashlight. The room was a nursery. A crib, long unused, sat in one corner. A rocking horse, one none of them remembered, stood still in the other. Faded alphabet letters were painted on the wall in peeling, pastel colors. A child's name had once been spelled out above the crib, but now only a few letters remained. L_A. In the center of the room, beneath a plastic tarp, was a stack of items wrapped carefully in linen. Eloise peeled it back. Photos. Dozens of them, all of a boy. Red-haired, maybe 7 or 8 in the later ones, some with Margaret, others with someone else. A woman who looked like Margaret, but not quite. Her face was sharper, her smile more feral. She wasn't their mother, but she was family. And then Eloise found it, tucked inside an old children's book, a birth certificate. Name: Lila Langley, mother; Isabella Langley, father; Daniel Langley, date of birth, June 6, 1980. Eloise froze. Isabella, her mother's sister. The one they'd been told moved abroad, the one never spoken of. Her hand flew to her mouth. Margaret had hidden a child. A fourth sibling, one none of them had ever known existed. As she backed away, the flashlight flickered. Just once, but enough for her to see it, through the small attic window just beyond the trees at the edge of the woods. A figure, still, watching, gone the second she turned her full attention to it. She fled the attic, breath shallow, knees shaking, slamming the panel shut behind her, and tumbling down the ladder into the hallway below. Camille and Victor came running at the noise. "What the hell is going on?" Camille barked, robe clutched around her, eyes wild. Eloise said only one word: "Nursery." They stared. "Upstairs," she added. "There's a room. It was hidden. There's someone else." Victor scoffed. "Are you saying we had a sibling no one told us about?" "Not had," Eloise whispered. "Have." And in the silence that followed, the wind shrieked through the chimney with a sound too much like laughter. The house wasn't just remembering, it was starting to speak, and someone out there was already listening. The mood in the Langley house had shifted. It was no longer just a tomb for memories. It had become a puzzle box of lies. Camille demanded answers, pacing the dining room like a prosecutor in court. Eloise, still pale from her attic discoveries, simply placed the birth certificate on the table like evidence. Victor sat back, arms crossed, but his eyes betrayed the flicker of unease he couldn't shake. "Isabella Langley," Camille said, scanning the document. "Our mother's sister. I've never even seen a photo of her." "That nursery wasn't for us," Eloise murmured. "It was for Lila, her daughter." Victor took the document, frowning. "Is it even real? I mean, how do we know this isn't some elaborate trick by Mom?" Camille snapped. "She faked her death and left us riddles. So yes, Victor, I'd say anything is possible." No one mentioned the figure Eloise had seen in the woods. But none of them slept that night. By morning, Margaret's next envelope appeared under the kitchen door, slid through silently. Victor found it first. The handwriting was unmistakable, flowing, maternal, calculated. "Look in the box he never opened, the one hidden in plain sight. You'll find the piece I never dared say aloud." The message was unsigned. Victor knew exactly where to go. Their father had kept a battered leather trunk in his study, always locked. A decoy, Victor had assumed, some prop to make him feel like a patriarch. But the lock was old, pickable. Inside, letters, dozens of them, bound with twine and smelling faintly of rosewater. He called Camille and Eloise in as he read the first one aloud. It was dated July 12, 1981. "Dearest Daniel, I miss the nights we stole away. Margaret doesn't know. She mustn't know. The baby's due soon. If it's a girl, I want to name her Lila. You always said that name suited someone who'd change everything." Eloise gasped. The handwriting wasn't Margaret's. It was tighter, slanted, more desperate. Isabella, their mother's own sister, had been sleeping with their father. And the child? Lila. The same name Eloise had seen spelled on the nursery wall. The air in the study thickened. The betrayal felt fresh, despite the decades. Camille ran her fingers along the pages of the letter as if it might burn her. "She knew," she said slowly. "Margaret, she had to know. And instead of exposing them, she raised that baby here? Hid her? After the affair? Or tried to," Eloise said. "We don't know what happened to Lila." Victor leaned forward, eyes sharp. "We do know one thing. Isabella's house burned down. The same year these letters stopped. Don't you think that's a little convenient?" Camille narrowed her eyes. "The fire. Mom told us it was an accident. That Isabella died. But there's no obituary. I checked. No record of a body. Just the fire." Eloise's breath caught. "Then what if Isabella didn't die?" Victor turned cold. "Then who raised Lila?" Later that night, Eloise found herself drawn to the family photo albums. The living room had a cabinet stuffed with them, dusty, untouched since their father's funeral. And there, buried between pictures of first days of school and blurry birthdays, was a photo no one remembered taking. A picnic. Eloise, Camille, and Victor on a blanket, smiling. Margaret in the background. And a red-haired girl sitting off to the side, barely visible, peeking out from behind a tree. No one had ever noticed her before. But she was there, watching. Victor stepped outside to clear his head. The wind was sharp, the scent of pines strong in the air. But as he walked the perimeter of the estate, a glint caught his eye from the tree line. A silver pendant, hanging from a branch by a red ribbon. He approached slowly. The pendant was heart-shaped, scratched from time. He opened it. Inside were two tiny photos. Daniel Langley, and a woman who looked exactly like Margaret. But she wasn't smiling, and under her image was a name, Isabella. Victor turned at the sound of a twig snapping, but saw no one. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on him. Back inside, Camille began to suspect something deeper. If Margaret knew everything, she whispered, why now? Why fake her death now, after all these years? Eloise didn't respond, but she couldn't stop staring at the photo. The red-haired girl, the pendant, the drawing in the cellar, everything pointed to one terrifying possibility. Lila hadn't died in that fire, she'd survived. And now, she was coming home. The stranger showed up the next morning, just after dawn, as if summoned by the storm clouds brewing over the Langley estate. He drove an old, rust-colored Lincoln, its body tired but dignified, parking at the edge of the gravel drive without a word. A tall man stepped out, dressed in a black wool coat and worn leather gloves, with sharp eyes that flicked to every window like a hawk scanning for movement. The lines in his face spoke of battles long since fought, but not forgotten. Camille, Victor, and Eloise stood at the doorway when he rang the bell. I'm looking for the Langley children, the man said, voice gravelly and calm. We're not children anymore, Camille said warily. Who are you? The man reached into his coat and slowly withdrew a document, a second envelope sealed with the same wax stamp Margaret had used on her will. The letterhead read, Executor of the Supplemental Will of Margaret E. Langley. My name is Nolan Graves, he said. I was a detective once. These days I do favors for old ghosts. Eloise stared at him. You knew our mother? Nolan offered the faintest smile. Better than most. Camille didn't invite him in. She led him to the drawing room instead, where the siblings demanded answers. Nolan gave them none. At least, not the ones they expected. He placed the envelope on the table, then pulled a heavy silver key from around his neck and laid it beside it. Margaret faked her death, he said without preamble. She's alive. Safe, for now. Camille immediately stood. This is absurd. She did it to protect you, Nolan interrupted, voice suddenly cold, and to draw something out, or rather someone. Victor leaned in, intrigued despite himself. Who? Nolan folded his arms. Your father was not the man you thought he was. No kidding, Camille muttered. Nolan continued. Daniel Langley was involved with some dangerous people. Money laundering. Stolen artifacts, off-the-books accounts stretching across continents. He wasn't just hiding assets from Margaret, he was hiding from the people he worked with, and those he betrayed. The siblings exchanged tense glances. This confirmed what the clues had already begun to suggest, but hearing it aloud made it real. So what's this got to do with us? Victor asked. Nolan's eyes hardened. You're his blood. That means someone out there thinks you know where the money is. And when your mother caught wind that they'd finally come sniffing again, she took the only route she had left. She vanished. Eloise whispered. But she didn't vanish. She left a game. Nolan nodded. That game is bait. And a warning. Camille's voice cut through like a knife. You helped her fake her death? I helped her survive, Nolan snapped, the first flicker of heat in his voice. Margaret didn't want to leave, but she had no choice. Not once she saw that figure watching the house. The same one Eloise spotted in the attic window. Eloise's mouth went dry. So she came to me, Nolan went on, because I'm the only one left she trusts. We were partners, once, a long time ago, before Daniel, before all of this, Camille frowned. Partners? As in? Nolan's smile was slow and sad. You figure that out when you're ready. He slid the silver key across the table. She wanted you to have this. It opens the west cellar door beneath the stables. There's more down there. Documents, footage, things Daniel kept hidden from all of you. But be careful. If someone's already inside the estate, they may be looking for the same things. Victor sat back, suddenly uneasy. Inside? You think whoever's after us is here? Nolan's gaze lingered at the window. I don't think. I know. Later, after Nolan left to take a walk around the perimeter, Camille watched him disappear into the woods with the confidence of someone who'd survived worse places. Eloise stood near the window. Do you trust him? She asked. Camille didn't respond right away. I don't know, she said. But I think Mom did. And that might be the only thing keeping us alive. That night, Victor sat alone in the den, watching security footage Nolan had installed earlier that day. At 2:46 a.m., a figure appeared on the eastern lawn. Slim, wearing a hood, moving with purpose. The camera zoomed. The face wasn't visible, but the figure paused at the window and waved. Victor recoiled from the screen. Because the hand that waved, it wore a ring that once belonged to their mother. The Langley house, once merely creaking and cold, now pulsed with something darker, something watching. The siblings no longer moved together. They split off, each pursuing their own suspicions, fears, and secrets. The air between them, once only brittle, had turned poisonous. Camille took to locking her bedroom door at night. Victor slept with a fire poker under his mattress, and Eloise began hiding her sketchbook, where she'd been compulsively drawing faces she didn't recognize, one of them eerily similar to the figure on the lawn from the surveillance footage. The one wearing Margaret's ring. It started with Camille. She claimed she was looking for their mother's medical records, something to confirm the story of Margaret's death. But Eloise found her in Margaret's old study with a flashlight and a crowbar, prying open a drawer in the writing desk Margaret always kept locked. "What the hell are you doing?" Eloise hissed. Camille didn't flinch. "There's more to this than letters and games. I think Mom was hiding all her secrets." Eloise narrowed her eyes. "Or maybe you're the one with something to hide." Camille glared but said nothing. Instead, she removed a manila folder from the drawer. Inside were faded photocopies of legal documents, Margaret's handwritten notes scrawled in the margins, and on top of them all, a photograph. It showed Victor, mid-20s, standing next to a white-haired man in a luxury suit. The caption on the back, written in Margaret's unmistakable hand, "Victor, Zurich, 2012, the missing funds?" That night, Victor was alone in the greenhouse, drinking from an expensive bottle of wine he'd swiped from the cellar. He was scrolling through encrypted messages on his phone, buried beneath layers of proxy apps, messages that no longer came but once had. The last one had arrived just before Margaret's supposed death. "They know, clean up or I will. A." Victor had told no one about the trust fund, about how he'd siphoned off small amounts over the years to cover his startups, debts, and ultimately to silence someone who had started asking the wrong questions, someone who had died suspiciously. But now the past was crawling back. Suddenly his phone buzzed again. Blocked number. One line. "You can't hide what you buried." Attached was a photo. His car, parked in the greenhouse drive. And underneath it, his brake line, freshly cut. Meanwhile, Eloise had been meeting Nolan Graves in secret. They met behind the old shed, where the shadows from the trees swallowed them whole. "He's unraveling," she told him. "Victor, and Camille's not much better." Nolan rubbed his stubble jaw. "That's part of the design. Margaret knew they'd fracture. She wanted to see who would hold." "You think this is still a test?" "No," Nolan said. "I think the test is over. Now comes the reckoning." He handed her a file. Old hospital records. A single name, Lila Isabella Langley, born 1982. Committed 1991. Discharged. Blank. "I thought she died in the fire," Eloise whispered. "She didn't. She survived and was institutionalized after a traumatic event. Someone pulled her out of that place 10 years later, but the name on the discharge order was forged." Eloise looked up. "You think she's alive?" Nolan's silence was the only answer she needed. That same night, Camille confronted Victor in the den. "I found the Zurich photo," she said coldly, "and the notes. What exactly were you doing with Dad's shell company?" Victor said nothing, but his jaw tightened. "Did you know about the missing millions?" Camille pressed. "Were you helping him, or did you just decide to inherit the mess early?" Victor stood, eyes blazing. "You want to accuse me of something? Go ahead. But remember who's been living off those dividends for years. You're not clean either." Camille stepped closer. "We're not talking about dividends. We're talking about crimes. The kind someone might kill over." The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. "I don't trust you," Victor said flatly. "Good," Camille replied. "Because I don't trust anyone anymore." Later that evening, as the rain lashed against the windows, Eloise returned to her room to find her sketchbook open on the bed, pages torn out. Someone had drawn over her sketches in red ink, circling one face. The red-haired girl. Next to it, a scrawled message in unfamiliar handwriting. "She's closer than you think." By midnight, the power cut out. The house plunged into darkness. A scream echoed from the west wing. When they all converged by flashlight, they found Victor standing in the hallway, trembling. "Someone was in my room," he whispered. "They left something in my bed." Camille shone her light on the bundle. Wrapped in a silk scarf was the ring, the one Margaret had always worn, only now it was streaked with fresh blood. The storm broke just after dawn. Heavy winds battered the Langley estate, tearing leaves from the trees and bending branches against the rotting shutters. Inside the mansion, the siblings were still raw from the night before, rattled by Victor's bloody discovery, the mysterious vandalism of Eloise's sketchbook, and the chilling silence that followed. They argued all morning about calling the police. Camille insisted it would only complicate matters if Margaret truly was alive. Victor wanted security cameras checked, then ripped out. Eloise, more withdrawn than ever, said little, but kept her sketchbook close, as if afraid someone might steal her drawings again. Then came the knock at the front door. 3 sharp raps. No one moved at first. Each of them exchanged glances, each suspecting the same thing. Whoever, or whatever, was outside wasn't a stranger. Camille was the one to answer it. The woman on the doorstep was soaked to the bone, rainwater clinging to her pale coat and dripping from her auburn hair. Her face was gaunt, but oddly familiar. A spectral echo of Margaret in her youth, with sharper features and piercing hazel eyes that flicked between them all with unnerving precision. She smiled faintly. "Hello," she said. "I'm Lila. I think I'm your sister." The silence inside the Langley house was thunderous. Lila's arrival was like dropping a lit match into dry leaves. Victor immediately demanded a DNA test. Camille didn't say a word but watched her like a prosecutor building a case. Eloise, the only one who seemed less shocked than curious, asked gently, "How did you find us?" Lila's answer was simple. "I didn't," she said. "The house did." She explained that for years, she'd been following fragments, stories whispered through old social workers, an erased name on a patient list, half-burned letters she'd once found beneath a floorboard in the institution. Letters signed only M. "I didn't know what they meant until Margaret's obituary appeared," Lila continued. "I came to pay my respects and see if anything was left. But this place, this game, it was already waiting for me." Eloise frowned. "What game?" Lila reached into her coat and removed a card, worn, water-streaked, but unmistakably bearing Margaret's wax seal. It was addressed, "To the one who remembers the fire." Camille snatched it from her hand and examined it with barely restrained suspicion. "You're saying Mom included you? That you've been part of this from the beginning?" Lila's smile faltered. "I don't know what Margaret intended, but I think I was always meant to return." The DNA test results arrived 2 days later. Lila Langley, 99.9% match, half-sister. Their reactions were as different as their personalities. Victor was quiet, stewing behind his laptop. Camille dove deeper into Margaret's personal journals, hunting for inconsistencies. But Eloise followed Lila. There was something uncanny about her. She knew the layout of the mansion better than someone who'd never lived there should. She walked certain halls as if tracing old memories, even paused outside the attic with a look of hollow recognition in her eyes. One night, Eloise found her in the nursery, the one hidden behind the attic wall, sitting in the rocking chair with one of the old toys in her lap. "This was mine," Lila whispered. "The rabbit. I used to hide it in the crawl space when things got loud." Eloise stepped closer. "You remember? Only in flashes, shadows, screaming, smoke." "And our mother?" Eloise asked. Lila's gaze was unreadable. "She wasn't there that night. It was someone else." Suspicion deepened when Lila began leading them to places even Nolan hadn't mentioned. She unearthed a rusted key buried beneath a loose stone in the garden wall, then used it to unlock an old drawer in Daniel Langley's workshop. Inside was a photo album, sealed in plastic, filled with pictures none of the siblings had seen before. Daniel, Isabella, Lila as a toddler, a summer picnic beside a lake none of them could name, but most disturbing of all, Margaret, standing beside her estranged sister, smiling. Camille was furious. Why didn't she tell us about any of this? Victor stared at the photos, jaw clenched. Because she was preparing for something. Or hiding something, Camille muttered. Lila only watched them. Quiet. Distant. I think she knew he'd come looking, Lila said. The man our father betrayed. Camille turned to her. Who is he? Lila hesitated, then said, I only ever heard one name. Whispers in the hallways. The staff at the hospital used to call him the broker. Eloise's breath caught. He's real? I don't know, Lila said. But if he is, he's not after money. He's after the house. That night, Lila stood at the upstairs window, watching the tree line. A shape moved between the trees. Tall, deliberate. She didn't flinch. Instead, she whispered under her breath, I'm here now. Come and get it. The greenhouse had always been Margaret's sanctuary. Ivy clung to its crumbling frame, and sunlight filtered through the warped glass in fractured beams. But in recent years, it had become overgrown, neglected. Just another corner of the estate left to rot. Until Lila led them there, it began with a memory. She told them she used to sit on the stone bench outside the greenhouse as a child, listening to her father whisper with a man in a gray coat. She remembered a word, ledger, and the way her mother, Isabella, would panic if the bench was moved. Lila returned to that same bench, now moss-covered and split by frost, and pried loose the stone base with a crowbar. Beneath it, she uncovered a square of metal bolted into the earth. A trapdoor. No one had ever seen it before. Not even Camille, who had combed the property deeds and architectural plans during her legal audit. Not even Victor, who'd installed the original security system. And certainly not Eloise, who had spent her lonely teenage years sketching in the greenhouse, oblivious to what lay beneath her feet. The moment the trapdoor was revealed, the air shifted. Even the birds went silent. Do we open it? Eloise asked, her voice tight. Victor answered by flicking open his pocket knife and cutting through the rusted bolt. It groaned open. What they found below was not just a basement, but a vault. A tunnel of stone steps led them to a temperature-controlled chamber, silent and dry, lined with filing cabinets, safety deposit boxes, and a massive safe with a digital keypad. In the center stood a metal desk, long abandoned, covered in dust, but oddly not untouched. Someone had been here recently. Victor began scanning through the files. These are offshore accounts, shell corporations, stock transfers. This is Dad's empire. Camille moved toward the safe, inspecting the keypad. And this is the center of it. Eloise turned slowly, running her fingers along the stone wall. She paused when she reached a word etched faintly into the surface, almost a whisper. Exodus. What does that mean? She asked. It's not a word, Lila murmured, approaching. It's a code. Hours later, they returned with Nolan. The ex-detective confirmed what they feared. Daniel Langley had not merely hidden money, he had laundered millions through criminal intermediaries. Names popped up again and again in the documents. Art dealers, investment banks, even an arms company with no discernible origin. And at the center of the web, the broker. Nolan was grim. I investigated this man in the 80s. No real name, just whispers. He helped powerful men hide terrible things. And he always kept a piece for himself. Victor shook his head. But why hide it all here? Because Daniel made a deal, Nolan said, and then broke it. He motioned to the safe. This isn't just about money. I think Daniel kept evidence, insurance, and if the broker knows it's here, he'll come for it. Camille looked at Nolan, eyes narrowed. You knew about this all along. I suspected, Nolan admitted. Margaret brought me in near the end. She thought someone might come for the kids once she was gone. She's not gone, Victor snapped. No, Nolan agreed. But she's close. As Nolan worked on cracking the safe, Lila wandered to the filing cabinets. She opened one labeled Langley, Private. Inside were photographs, letters, and videotapes. One cassette was labeled only Isabella, Final Visit. Eloise held it up. Should we watch it? Lila's hand darted out, snatching it away. No, she said too quickly. Not yet. Camille's eyes narrowed. Why not? I just need time, Lila whispered. Camille didn't push, but she didn't forget either. That night, Victor and Eloise sat on the stone bench outside the greenhouse, watching the moon filter through the cracked glass. Do you trust her? Victor asked. Eloise looked down. I want to. Victor sipped from a flask. She knows too much. Way too much. She's been through hell, Eloise said. So have we, Victor's jaw clenched. Yeah, but you and I didn't come back from it knowing the vault code. By morning, Nolan had opened the safe. Inside, 3 hard drives, a bundle of cash, and a leather-bound journal with Daniel's initials. The first page read, To whoever finds this, I was never the monster, but I made one. And now, he's coming home. As the siblings stood around the vault, a low rumble echoed through the tunnel. Eloise froze. What was that? Lila slowly turned toward the trapdoor. It's him, she whispered. He's already here. The storm returned on the night the safe opened. Black clouds rolled over the estate, thunder booming like distant cannon fire. Inside the mansion, a tension pulsed beneath every floorboard and flickered in every light bulb. Margaret Langley's children stood at the precipice of a truth that felt less like a discovery and more like a reckoning. Camille stood in the study, turning over Daniel's journal in her hands. She'd read it twice already. Her father's tidy, compulsive handwriting unraveled with each page, detailing his rise through shadowy financial networks, the offshore accounts, the laundering operations, and finally, the fear. Fear of the broker. He said I owed him a legacy, Daniel had written, so I buried it where he'd never find it. Not in gold. In blood. In family. Camille felt a chill crawl down her spine. She didn't understand it yet, but Daniel's words weren't just metaphorical. He'd hidden something far worse than money. Something he knew the broker would kill for. And perhaps already had. Downstairs, Eloise wandered the halls with a candle. The power had flickered out an hour ago, and backup generators powered only parts of the house. She walked carefully, haunted not just by shadows but memories, half-formed sketches in her head, as if the house itself was bleeding pieces of her childhood back into her. She paused outside the music room. It was open. Inside, the grand piano's lid was lifted. A single note had been pressed, the string humming in the silence. No one had entered that room in years. Then she saw it. On the keys, a folded piece of parchment. She opened it. Her breath caught. Don't trust the one who came late. Blood knows blood, but so does betrayal. Eloise turned around sharply, heart pounding. No one there, only the silence. Only the storm. In the parlor, Victor confronted Nolan. I know you've been lying, he said, stepping forward with a flashlight and steel in his voice. You've known more than you've said since the beginning. Margaret didn't just hire you to protect us. She gave you something. A second will. Nolan didn't flinch. You're right. He reached into his coat and handed Victor a sealed envelope. It was addressed simply, to be opened when the vault is breached. Victor tore it open. Inside, a handwritten letter from Margaret. If you're reading this, then the trap is set. You must all stay in the house. Do not run. The broker will come for the drives. He will come for the truth, and someone among you will try to help him. Trust is your only weapon and your greatest weakness. Victor's hands trembled. She knew, he whispered. She knew one of us would turn. Nolan nodded grimly. That's why she brought you all back, not just for the money, for the truth. Suddenly, a crash echoed from upstairs. They rushed toward the sound. The nursery door was ajar. Inside, the cradle was overturned, and Lila stood over a shattered mirror, blood on her palm. I saw someone, she gasped. In the reflection, he was inside the house. Camille stepped forward, scanning the corners. How? We've locked every door. No, Nolan said. Not every door. He turned and led them to the east wing, a part of the mansion long sealed off due to asbestos, warped flooring, and disrepair. There, behind a wall of moldy drapes, was a door Margaret had once forbidden them to enter. Victor forced it open with a crowbar. Beyond it, a narrow passage, lined with faded wallpaper leading into the oldest part of the house, and footprints in the dust. Fresh. They followed the passage through twisting halls until they reached a chamber beneath the original foundation. A strange metal device, half mechanical and half handcrafted, sat in the center. Wires ran through the walls like veins. Camille gasped. "Is this a trap?" Nolan nodded. "Margaret's final design." He pressed a button, and a screen lit up. Grainy black and white security footage from every room. The cameras had been embedded long ago, hidden behind paintings, mirrors, even the grandfather clock. "She's been watching us," Eloise whispered. But Lila wasn't surprised. She said she'd always keep watch, that no matter how lost I was, I'd always find my way back. They turned to her. "What else did she tell you?" But before Lila could answer, the screen flickered, and then all the cameras went dead. A voice crackled through the intercom. Low. Male. Cold. "Game's over." All the lights went out. Metal shutters slammed down over the windows. Gas hissed faintly through the vents, and a hidden speaker played a woman's voice. Margaret's voice. "If you're hearing this, then the house is no longer safe. But the truth must survive, even if we don't. Work together, or you won't leave. This house is now the cage, and the past is the lock." As the message ended, Victor grabbed the journal, Camille the drives, and Nolan reached for his pistol. "This was never a scavenger hunt," Camille muttered. "No," Victor agreed. "It was a war plan, and someone among them, was holding the enemy's map." The mansion was no longer a house, it was a battlefield. The shutters were down, the lights were out. The very walls seemed to groan as if the building itself mourned what was to come. In the bowels of the old estate, Margaret Langley's children stood surrounded by ghosts, some long buried, some standing beside them in flesh. Victor clutched Daniel's journal like a shield. Camille kept the encrypted hard drives locked in her briefcase. Eloise, pale and wide-eyed, held her sketchbook against her chest like a talisman. Lila watched them all with a strange calm, as if she'd known this moment would come. Nolan Graves, grim as ever, led them toward the library. The hidden surveillance room had been compromised. Someone had tampered with it from inside. They needed a defensible position. The library had stone walls, narrow entrances, and heavy doors. And, according to Nolan, one more secret. "I helped Margaret install it," he explained, leading them through a panel in the fireplace that opened to a reinforced chamber. "If this ever went sideways, this is where she wanted you to wait." Inside were survival supplies, an old landline, a gun safe, and a projector. Camille narrowed her eyes. "A projector?" Nolan nodded. "One final message." He loaded the reel. The whirring filled the silence. Then Margaret's face appeared on the wall, alive, regal, and no longer pretending to be frail. "If you've made it this far," Margaret began, "then you've done better than I expected. And perhaps worse. One of you is not what you seem." She paused, allowing the words to settle in. "You were brought home not for punishment but for truth. Daniel's sins were not yours to carry, but neither could you escape them. Someone among you has already betrayed the others. And the broker is inside." Gasps echoed. Victor looked at Camille. Camille turned toward Lila. Eloise stepped back from all of them. Nolan drew his gun and pointed it at the door. The projector flickered. "You must confront the past, because now it has come for you." Suddenly, the projector screen collapsed, and standing behind it was a man in black. Tall, cold eyes, impeccable suit. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Nolan fired once. The man ducked, disappearing into the shadows behind the shelves. Chaos erupted. Camille shoved the drives into a satchel and fled. Eloise screamed for her. Victor ran to block the hallway, but Lila stayed still. Too still. It happened fast. Nolan tackled the intruder, knocking the gun from his hand. But another figure appeared behind them, masked, dressed in black. They stabbed Nolan in the side and vanished down the hall. Victor grabbed him. "We need to get out of here. Now!" But Nolan clutched Victor's arm and whispered, "It's not him, it's her." They turned and saw Lila holding the missing surveillance key. Camille stormed back into the room, breathless. "The vault's been wiped. Someone cleared the footage. The backups." She stopped. Her eyes fell on Lila, on the key, on her hand, bloody from earlier, or had it always been hers? Lila? Eloise's voice cracked. What did you do? Lila's expression didn't change. I survived. The truth spilled out in fragments, more devastating than fire. Lila was Margaret's child, but not Daniel's. Her real father was the broker. He had found Isabella when she was broken, vulnerable. He manipulated her, fathered Lila, and used her to get to Daniel. When Isabella tried to escape, the broker set the fire that killed her. Lila was hidden away, not in a hospital, but in one of the broker's facilities. She escaped years later and found Margaret, who had tried to keep her safe. But hatred had grown faster than love. The scavenger hunt was never Lila's test, it was her stage. A way to tear the family apart from within. She'd planned to betray the broker, but she also wanted revenge on the siblings who had lived lives she never had. I didn't want to kill you, she said, voice trembling now. But I wanted you to know. Victor stepped forward. Know what? That you were never the only Langley, she whispered. You were just the ones who got chosen. A sharp whistle echoed from above. Then, a voice. Margaret's voice. But this time, not recorded. She appeared at the top of the grand staircase, flanked by 2 armed security men. Alive. And very, very real. Lila's knees buckled. Margaret descended slowly, her eyes locked on the daughter she had once saved, and lost. I hoped you'd choose differently, Margaret said softly. But I knew you wouldn't. Lila looked away. You lied to me. You said I'd be part of the family. I said you had to earn it, Margaret replied. Camille turned to her mother, rage and awe battling across her face. You faked your death. You staged all of this. I had to, Margaret said, to protect you. From him, from her, from yourselves. Victor raised his hands, almost laughing. So what now? Are we just supposed to be grateful? No, Margaret said. You're supposed to survive. The broker was captured, beaten and bleeding, but alive. Lila was taken into custody, weeping but silent. Nolan, wounded, survived. Barely. Margaret did not apologize. But she wept, for Isabella, for Daniel, for everything she could not undo. Weeks later, the siblings sat at the long dining room table. Not as heirs, not as enemies, as survivors. Camille placed the journal at the center. Eloise lit a candle. Victor poured 3 glasses of wine, 1 for each of them, and 1 for the mother who, in death and in life, had made them see what family really meant. It wasn't inheritance. It was endurance. It was truth. And it was never, ever simple.